Horror is a genre that we all know and love, some of us more than others, and where there's horror, there's Hammer Film Productions, the British film production company founded in 1934 that has dominated the horror genre for a long time. This production house is behind the reintroduction of the most beloved characters like Count Dracula, Baron Victor Frankenstein, and the Mummy in colorized form. Hammer Films wanted to create art, and sure, they dabbled in different genres, but in the end, Hammer Films Productions found their niche in the horror genre, and oh boy, did they make a name for themselves there. So, in today's video, we'll be indulging in a little blast from the past and looking at the best movies made by Hammer Films that you should definitely watch. Anyways, before we get too deep into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Horror of Dracula, 1958. Coming out in 1958, Horror of Dracula is the first of the many Hammer horror films that were inspired by Bram Stoker's work. With Terence Fisher in the director's chair and Peter Cushing, Carol Marsh, Christopher Lee, Melissa Sterling, and Michael Gough as the actors, this movie is a certified Hammer horror classic. Of course, given the same source material, this movie could have easily been confused for the 1931 movie that Universal produced starring Bela Lugosi. Hence, that's why in the US, the Hammer horror movie is better known as Horror of Dracula. That's right, Saruman plays the titular Count Dracula, who's visited by John Van Eason's Jonathan Harker. Although Jonathan claimed that he was there to be a librarian, his real goal was to kill Dracula. Sadly, Jonathan gets bitten by a prisoner whom Dracula has kept in the castle. Dracula dragged the lady off of Jonathan and disappeared into the darkness. Next, we meet Peter Cushing's Dr. Van Helsing, who had arrived in Klausenburg hoping to find Harker. He learns of Harker's death, and after begrudgingly staking Harker through the heart, Helsing comes back to inform Arthur Holmwood, Harker's brother, Mina, Harker's sister-in-law, and Lucy Holmwood, Harker's fiancée. When it comes to this film, it's very evident that it's the movie of the Hammer horror film list. This movie's the one that made a star out of Christopher Lee practically overnight. The gore, the eroticism, the revolutionizing of Dracula's form of horror with the tinge of sexual exploitation that we've seen in the movies from the 70s, this movie has it all. Similarly, we have Peter Cushing's Van Helsing. He's so cold and so scientific that it brings forth the dichotomy that Bram Stoker truly intended to convey through his work. Their final confrontation at the end of the movie is so iconic, so charismatic, that both of the actors returned again and again to these roles in the Hammer horror list of movies regarding Dracula. Dracula's sex appeal, along with the gore and death, along with the new revolutionary way of filmmaking, truly gave Hammer the best film formula that they had ever had, and they used it for the next 2 decades. The Curse of Frankenstein, 1957. The next movie on our list is also directed by Terence Fisher. This one was based on the 1818 novel written by Mary Shelley. The Curse of Frankenstein was the pioneer film of Hammer Productions' series of Frankenstein films that followed. Actually, the Hammer horror that we know and love so much today was established with The Curse of Frankenstein in 1957, Horror of Dracula in 1958, and The Mummy in 1959. These 3 films came together to give Hammer horror a distinctive vibe and created an almost subgenre of gothic horror films. We have Peter Cushing as Victor Frankenstein while Christopher Lee plays the creature. We think the incredible chemistry between these 2 actors is what made them come back for the Horror of Dracula, which made them so incredibly well loved. Other than them, we also have Robert Urquhart and Hazel Court playing Paul Krempe and Elizabeth respectively. The story follows all the beats of Mary Shelley's work and adds on to it by describing what a cold-hearted and selfish man the Baron was. Overall, we'd say this is a rather interesting adaptation of Shelley's work. This is the first ever Hammer film in color, and after Universal's heydays in the 30s, 25 years later, horror as a genre was back again, revived in a way that no one saw coming. In Universal's version, we effectively follow the creature the most. However, in the Hammer Films version, we follow the journey of the Baron. While yes, this leads to the movie feeling a little too talkative and a little too depressing at times, this movie brought something fresh to the table. Let's be honest, Terence Fisher and Jimmy Sangster as a duo is the best thing they could have taken for this movie. Fisher is a pioneer and shot the entire film in Eastman color, giving this movie a terrific and iconic Gothic style that ended up becoming Hammer's signature style in later years. Sangster, on the other hand, gave us such a thought-provoking and visceral script that we understand that the true monster was never the creature, but the scientist himself. With Peter Cushing playing Victor Frankenstein, all the intended effects that Sangster wished for the Baron to have on the audience happened. Cushing played the elegant and cold-blooded Frankenstein to a T, and Lee's creature is simply astounding. Thanks to the incredible performance from both actors, they both ended up becoming horror legends from this point on. Everything about this film screams Hammer, and that's why. If you want to experience the actual Hammer horror productions and their magic, you definitely need to watch this film. The Devil Rides Out, 1968. Whether you know this movie as The Devil Rides Out or The Devil's Bride, as the US title would suggest, there's no denying that it's one of Terence Fisher's best movies. This movie is based on a novel written by Dennis Wheatley, and it has the same title. Here's a fun fact about this film. It's not just a Hammer Films production movie. This movie was also produced by Seven Arts Productions, another very popular production house. In fact, The Devil Rides Out is the last film that Seven Arts Productions produced before they merged with Warner Bros. After this merger, they came to be known as Warner Bros. Seven Arts. With Terence Fisher in the director's chair and Christopher Lee returning to play the role of Nicholas, this movie is a ride from the beginning. We also have Charles Gray, Leon Green, Patrick Mower, Sarah Lawson, and Nike Arigi as part of the star-studded cast. So now you might be wondering, what is this movie about? Well, it's about two friends joining hands to save a family friend from a satanic cult. Unlike other Hammer films that have a lot of blood, shocks, and gore on screen that'll make you feel queasy, this movie has none of that. This movie kind of taps into horror, much like Asian horror movies do. The slow building of the tension is unnerving, and by the end of the scene, you'll know that things aren't going so well and something just isn't right. The best way to describe this movie would be to call it creepy, because that's precisely what it is. Every scene of this film is iconic, but if we had to pick one moment that's truly unforgettable, it would have to be the protective circle sequence. The cult calling out to the devil is extremely frightening to watch. And since we're on the topic, the actor who sold the movie to us has to be Christopher Lee. His superb acting chops really shine through. The way he portrays his character as someone who knows what's right and what's wrong and has an idea about how to get through all the hardships is genuinely something worth looking up to. Patrick Moe and Leon Green as Simon and Rex give us astounding performances. You truly believe the bond that Simon and Rex share with Christopher Lee's Duke. The solid cast, along with Charles Gray's fantastic portrayal of the devil worshipper, gives us an absolutely harrowing film. The Mummy, 1959. I can't be the only one who always thinks of the Brendan Fraser movie whenever we hear this title, right? But no, this movie, by the Hammer Film Productions, is yet another masterpiece directed by Terence Fisher, with Jimmy Sangster as the writer. This movie also stars Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, so you can bet this movie has all the ingredients to be a hit. Now, while this name is very reminiscent of the 1932 Universal film, this movie is actually based on the 1940 Universal films titled The Mummy's Tomb and The Mummy's Hand. If you look at the climax of The Mummy 1959, you'll find that it's pretty similar to that of The Mummy's Ghost, which came out in 1944. We follow a group of archaeologists who come across the tomb of Princess Ananka, the high priestess of the god Karnak. However, one of them ends up reading from the Scroll of Life, reviving the bodyguard of the princess, Codis, who will destroy anyone who desecrates her tomb. This movie is one of the earliest Hammer films that came out in color. The visual style that you see in The Mummy literally laid the groundwork for that iconic Hammer horror style that we now recognize today. The way cinematographer Jack Asher adds to the moodiness of the scenes with his camera work is beautiful. Yvonne Furneaux as Isabel, with Peter Cushing as her husband and Christopher Lee as the terrifying Codis, genuinely makes this movie a very enjoyable watch. This movie's the one that started off Hammer Horror's very own The Mummy franchise, so if you're someone often mystified by Egyptian mummies, this might be the movie for you. The Brides of Dracula, 1960. Terence Fisher returns to our list with Peter Cushing for this movie that came out in 1960. The Brides of Dracula serves as a sequel to the 1958 movie. The story of this movie is definitely far more refreshing than what we were expecting, and all of that credit goes to Jimmy Sangster, Edward Piercy, Peter Bryan, and Anthony Hines, who created this witty and chilling screenplay for the movie. Mary Ann Danielle's life has taken a turn for the worse when she ends up helping Baroness Meinster's son. Because who would have thought, the Baron is actually a vampire with a certain craving for the blood of young maidens. While it's not as good as the 1958 movie, in our opinion, The Brides of Dracula is an excellent standalone film. The visual effects of this movie might make you chuckle once in a while, but there's no denying that this is actually a pretty good movie. The richness of the color, the atmospheric broodiness, and the music during any of the horror scenes add together to give you the perfect spine-tingling movie. Fisher's directions are unflinching, and Cushing as Helsing is delightful. Martita Hunt is also memorable as the Baroness. David Peel is definitely a scary villain, but comparing him to Christopher Lee's Dracula would be a mistake, which I hope none of you end up committing if you watch this film. The Plague of the Zombies, 1966. Directed by John Gilling and written by Peter Bryan, The Plague of the Zombies is another noteworthy film in the Hammer Horror collection. Andre Morell, Jacqueline Pierce, Brooke Williams, John Carson, and Michael Ripper are the few names associated with this project. We have a Cornish village which is plagued by a mysterious illness. The local doctor, Peter Thompson, asks his mentor, Sir James Forbes, to help him out with this mysterious illness. However, when James Forbes shows up, things turn out to be a lot more voodoo-coded than expected. There's no denying that this film doesn't come anywhere close to the iconic Romero trilogy, neither does it have the typical Raimi gore that we have a separate fan following for. But despite these shortcomings, we would say that this movie is pretty great if you actually care for goofy zombie fun. The script is pretty intelligent for the most part, the aesthetic and the atmosphere are pretty well set, and the fine acting given by the cast is definitely praiseworthy. Andre Morell is the hero of this film, and even though he was 57 when it was shot, we would say that he's a very believable main character in an action horror film. Out of all the scenes in this movie, our personal favorite has to be when Alice comes out of her grave. Jacqueline Pierce really haunts our nightmares as Alice because of the way she smiles. Now, we're not going to pretend that the ending of this movie is great, because it's not. It's a little disappointing, honestly. However, that doesn't mean that the film isn't worth a watch. It would go rather well with The Reptile, another Hammer horror that came out the same year. Dracula, Prince of Darkness, 1966. Coming out in 1966, this is the third entry of Hammer Horror's Dracula franchise. This is also the film where Christopher Lee returns to reprise his role as the Count. We also have Barbara Shelley, Francis Matthews, and Andrew Keir in this film. Even though the movie starts with a prologue and we see Dr. Van Helsing destroying Count Dracula, sadly, we don't get to see Peter Cushing return in this movie as Van Helsing. With Father Sandor stepping in as the proxy Van Helsing, the story of this film is pretty simple. We have 4 tourists who go into the castle, accidentally end up reviving Dracula, and then all hell breaks loose. 2 of them survive and manage to meet with Father Sandor for help. There, they band together to go against Dracula and eventually end up defeating the undead king by drowning him in freezing water. We know revenge is a dish best served cold, but damn, we didn't think it would be that cold. With such a straightforward plot, you wouldn't expect this movie to be so good, but Hammer actually pulls it off. If you're someone who loves horror classics, then this movie is truly something you should put on your watch list. The first Kent, who dies in the hands of Clove, suffers a brutal and agonizing death. And given that this movie came out in 1966, we're pretty sure that that murder shocked everyone quite a bit. The movie definitely drags a little with the lack of Mr. Peter Cushing. You can tell that it would have been smoother sailing for this movie if the charismatic actor had been on the screen, but this is kind of made up for with Mr. Lee's shameless neck-biting. Even though he doesn't say a single word in the movie, his reckless attacks and general brutality and actions are truly unfathomable and horrifying enough. The Curse of the Werewolf, 1961. Based on the novel The Werewolf of Paris by Guy Andore, this movie stars Clifford Evans, Yvonne Romaine, and Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed plays the role of the werewolf, which was also his first ever role in cinema. We learn of the harrowing conditions that led to the birth of a lycanthrope and how, despite the better circumstances provided by Clifford Evans' Dawn, Oliver Reed's Leon cannot escape the curse of his birth. When you hear the term werewolf, you understandably imagine a man going through a brutal transformation and biting people's necks out. However, this movie is somewhat different. This movie plays out like a historical drama, almost dredging the fine line between Wolfman's horror, romance, and camp. The interpretation of each of the characters is rather evident, and the terror in the picture is palpable. Terence Fisher does a fantastic job bringing the horrors of the situation that led to the birth of a lycanthrope to life, and then how this young man's life falls apart. The story follows this young protagonist whose life is getting torn apart from the inside, and there's nothing he can do about it. That's what makes this movie so incredibly iconic. Quatermass and the Pit, 1967. 5 Million Years to Earth, or Quatermass and the Pit, whichever name you know this film by, happens to be the sequel to the other 2 Quatermass movies, Quatermass Experiment and Quatermass 2. Directed by Roy Ward Baker and written by Nigel Neal, the leading man behind the popular BBC television series, this movie is a sci-fi movie created by our love, Hammer Film Productions. The star-studded cast of this film includes Andrew Keir as Bernard Quatermass. This titular character was previously played by none other than Brian Donlevy in the previous two films. Other than him, we've got Barbara Shelley, Julian Glover, and James Donald. The plot of this film is simple and yet outlandish. We have people coming across Martian technology and ape-man skulls while digging tunnels in London. The whole film follows Professor Quatermass trying to figure out and stop the Martians from destroying humanity while no one else believes him. Horror films by Hammer Film Productions definitely have a special place in our hearts, but their science fiction movies aren't bad at all either. This is the third movie adaptation done by this film house on the BBC TV Quatermass series. To be honest, out of all the three movies, this one's probably the best. Roy Baker's an extremely competent director and manages to make us feel the dread that all the characters feel when they find out about the Martians. Quatermass and the Pit is a movie that can be rewatched over and over again. The details in the scenes and the conversations are genuinely intriguing. If you start paying attention to all of them, trust us, the movie experience of this film would be so much more pleasant and fulfilling. The ending of this film also pays off rather handsomely, so this movie should be high on your watch list. The Gorgon, 1964. Written by John Gilling and Anthony Nelson Keyes, this is another masterpiece directed by Terence Fisher. Christopher Lee, Richard Pascoe, Barbara Shelley, and Peter Cushing play the main characters in this horror film that will definitely leave you terrified. Set in 1910, Germany, we see the horrifying lives of the villagers in Vandorf. The village of Vandorf has seen 7 brutal murders in the past 5 years, and in each case, the victim was turned to stone. We follow a young couple in the first scene. Sasha is pregnant, and despite her words, Bruno went out to talk to her father. However, both of them end up dying in the forest that night. Sasha had turned to stone, and Bruno was found hanging from a tree. Dr. Nemiroff, the brain specialist, doesn't believe that people turning into stone is possible, whereas Bruno's father, Professor Heitz, has a theory of his own, which includes Megara, the Gorgon. A lot of things happen in this movie that we're not going to speak of, lest we spoil it, but we will say this much. The ending of this film is terribly bittersweet. Unlike other Hammer horror movies, Gorgon is actually not a scarefest. The story's driving force isn't gore, blood, and guts, it's the atmosphere and the different subplots at play. The story has a certain mysterious charm and allure to it, but the story is definitely absurd at some points. The ending is definitely impactful, but it would have been more impactful had it been stretched out just a little longer. The Gorgon, the main villainess of this movie, is truly a terrifying sight to behold, but then a close-up reveals that she looks somewhat goofy, and it's kind of hard to take her serious after that. James Bernard's music in this movie is definitely a plus that makes the overall experience much more enjoyable. The script is equal parts menacing, witty, and poetic. We think the most significant credit goes to the talented cast. Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee created the dynamic duo of Hammer Film Productions, and we refuse to take any notes on this. The way they both play off each other's gusto is amazing. Prudence Hyman gives us an extremely memorable performance as the Gorgon, and the Femme Fatale Award of Hammer Productions has to go to Barbara Shelley. The Gorgon isn't flawless, but it's a film with a lot of merit, which is why it's so high up on our list. Frankenstein Created Woman, 1967. The Frankenstein series is definitely one of the most popular series under Hammer Film Productions' belt. With Terence Fisher, Peter Cushing, Susan Denberg, and Anthony Hines, how can you honestly go wrong with this? The answer is, you don't. The movie starts with Hans working as an assistant to Dr. Frankenstein. Since the last film, Film 3, Victor has figured out a way to trap the soul of a deceased person. Now, Victor wants to figure out how to transfer the soul of a person to someone else. Hans has fallen in love with Christina, the local innkeeper's daughter. However, she got targeted by 3 rich dudes who ended up killing her father and blaming Hans for the murder. Hans is executed and Christina kills herself, unable to cope with his death. So, now Victor adds Hans's soul to Christina's body, creating the most vengeful and bizarre monster he's ever created. We know the plot's pretty bonkers, but that doesn't change the fact that this movie is actually pretty good. After all, it's one of the many movies Martin Scorsese has stated he enjoys. The whole concept of transference is jarring, but class snobbery, bullying, corruption, and revenge aren't. All of these elements packed into a 90-minute movie makes it quite entertaining. Over the years, Terence Fisher has given us many movies, so truthfully, he doesn't owe us anything at all. However, he keeps doing his best with each movie, and we see the effort in his efforts. The moody and dreamlike atmosphere, with Cushing's exceptional acting chops as the Baron, definitely make this movie worth your time. Taste the Blood of Dracula, 1970. Like the Frankenstein series, the Dracula series is another iconic franchise created by Hammer Film Productions for horror fans. Taste the Blood of Dracula is the fifth installment in the franchise and the fourth one to star Christopher Lee as the titular Dracula. Other characters include Gwen Watford and Jeffrey Keane. When this movie was released, Hammer Productions released Crescendo along with it, making it a double bill. Written by John Elder, the story follows William Hargood, Jonathan Secker, and Samuel Paxton, who were three good dudes on the surface, but deep down, these are perverts who visit brothels under the guise of charity. One such debaucherous night, they meet Lord Courtley, the one and only heir who was disinherited after he celebrated Black Mass. Lord Courtley asks the three men to buy Dracula's remnants from a businessman. When the trio brings the items to him, he tries to perform a blood ritual, but the three perverts opt out of the ceremony and kill Lord Courtley. This leads to Dracula's return to life and swearing vengeance against these three men. Unlike other Hammer films that pick up after a few years, this one follows up right after the end of the fourth movie. The continuity of these two films definitely makes them more enjoyable, and we weren't expecting Dracula to go full loyalty mode and go after the three perverts who killed off his servant, but you know what? Good on him. It's evident that this movie, which came out in the 1970s, contains a lot of gratuitous nudity, as sex was selling quite a lot in theaters at the time. Despite the dodgy lines, Christopher Lee manages to say those lines with just enough sincerity that we, the fans, are thoroughly entertained. The Vampire Lovers, 1970. Once again, we welcome Roy Ward Baker to our list with this new movie. The star-studded cast of this movie includes famous Hammer veterans like Kate O'Mara, Ingrid Pritt, Peter Cushing, Douglas Wilmer, and George Cole. This is the first film of the popular Karnstein trilogy, with the other two films being Lust for a Vampire and Twins of Evil, both of which came out in 1971. This movie in particular is based on the 1872 novella Carmilla, written by Sheridan Le Fanu. One of the main reasons this particular trilogy is so memorable and daring for its time is the pronounced lesbian themes. Yeah, that's right. We're introduced to Marcilla, the niece of a countess who leaves her with a general. However, soon after Marcilla starts living with the general, his niece falls ill and dies. Marcilla also disappears after her death, so the general sends for Hartog, the vampire hunter. As you may have guessed, the bodies start piling up while our vampire hunter tries to figure out how he can get his hands on Marcilla Karnstein. In the end, of course, the heroes win, with Carmilla dying, but is it truly the end of Carmilla and her ravenous appetite? We doubt it. Vampirism has always had an undertone of eroticism and lust to it, but after this film, the terms started intermingling rather heavily. In fact, before The Vampire Lovers, the eroticism in bloodsucker movies was an option, but since this movie, it's become mandatory. Ingrid Pitt gives us an extraordinarily memorable and well-loved gypsy vampire, Carmilla. Le Fanu's work had an inevitable seduction to it, which Pitt embraced nicely. Overall, this movie is a splendid masterpiece, and if you're a fan of vampires and Hammer films, or you just like watching femme fatales, then you need to see this film. The Phantom of the Opera, 1962. John Elder, also known as Anthony Hines, collaborated with Terence Fisher to give us this loose adaptation of Gaston Leroux's famous novel. Set in 1900, the film opens with Michael Gough's Lord Ambrose d'Arcy opening the new opera in the London Opera House. However, no one wants to sit in box number 5 because it's rumored to be haunted. Maria is the star of the show, and during her first aria, the murdered body of a stagehand swings out of the wings, which understandably freaks everyone out. Maria refuses to perform again, and Harry Hunter, the opera producer, starts auditioning other women. There, out of the chorus girls, he found Christine Charles with a promising voice. But how far can her voice take her when she's with Lord Ambrose, the main villain of the story? As you might know, each version of the novel deviates further and further from the original book. However, in this movie, the story is actually rather enjoyable. Michael Gough is extremely hateful as Lord Ambrose, which means he did a phenomenal job as the character. Edward D'Souza plays the role of Henry, the romantic interest for Christine, who's the handsome hunk that everyone deserves. Heather Sears is also memorable and sweet as Christine. Now, we usually see Herbert Lom as a comic character. Who can possibly forget his iconic role in the Pink Panther series? However, over here, he does beautifully as the Phantom. Even though the role isn't huge, the most impactful character of the film has to be the Phantom himself. Despite the flatness of the story, the scenery of the movie, the supporting cast, and the general tonality of the film somehow managed to make it work whenever you think it wouldn't. The dramatic retelling of Phantom of the Opera doesn't sound like it's worth a rewatch, but if we're being honest, we think this movie is really good and 100% worth your time. The Reptile, 1966. This 19th century film takes place in the fictional Cornish village of Clegmore Heath. Many people are dying of the Black Death, which definitely worries Harry Spalding, who recently inherited his late brother Charlie's cottage in the area. With Tom Bailey, the only nice person in the village, Harry ends up finding something far worse than we imagine. Roy Barrett and Jennifer Daniel give us the chemistry of a newlywed couple, which makes us emotionally invested in their journey as Harry and Valerie. Michael Ripper, John Laurie, Noel Willman, and Jacqueline Pierce as Tom Bailey, Mad Peter, Dr. Franklin, and Anna Franklin, respectively, only goes to show just how talented the whole cast of this film was. While the makeup job on this human-snake hybrid is a bit too goofy, the movie is actually pretty solid. All the actors put their souls into their roles and it shows. Gilling has done it again by choosing the most ludicrous story and somehow managing to pull it off despite all the cards being stacked against him. The Abominable Snowman, 1957. Val Guest directed this movie, which is known by many names. The Abominable Snowman, The Snow Creature, and The Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas are all the same movie. This movie was written by Nigel Neal based on The Creature, his television play that aired in 1955. With a star-studded cast of Forrest Tucker, Richard Wattis, Peter Cushing, and Maureen Connell, this movie is a horror fantasy that's well worth your time. What starts off as a journey for a botanist quickly takes a swift turn when Dr. Rollison encounters Tom Friend and his troupe who are going after the Yeti. Dr. Rollison joins out of scientific curiosity, but the trip ends up bloodier than expected because Friend keeps pushing the Yeti in abominable ways. Hammer Film Productions is popular for its color movies, so it's a bit jarring to see this black and white movie on the list. However, the black and white really works well for this film as it gives the entire thing an old monster movie vibe. This movie might not be Hammer Film Productions' finest work, but we're not going to pretend that it doesn't have anything to offer. Even in this movie, you can see the early signs of how creative this whole production house can be. The film's adventure style adds to the dread of the misadventure when things start getting out of control, and botanist Peter Cushing ends up with way more than he bargained for. The main monster of the movie doesn't show up every 5 minutes of the showtime, which is definitely something a lot of viewers might find annoying, but personally, we thought it added to the tension. The pacing of the film is pretty good, and not once do you find this film boring. While it's not the best movie out of Hammer's roster, it's certainly no slouch either. Hands of the Ripper, 1971. Based on a story by Edward Spencer Shue, Peter Sasti, and L.W. Davidson made The Hands of the Ripper, which was released as a double feature with Twins of Evil. With a premise as simple as the dawn of time, will a murderer's child follow in their parents' footsteps? This movie will grip you by the throat. We watch as Ankarad Reese's Anna gets adopted by Dr. Pritchard, played by Eric Porter, and we assume things will get better for her, but no. The scientific curiosity and morbid curiosity in Dr. Pritchard's mind is one and the same, as he keeps hiding Anna's murders. This movie has all the vibes of a slasher flick down to the necessary and well-loved psychological edge. Sassi's exceptional direction gives us some outlandish deaths with absolutely harrowing conclusions. The realistic backdrops in every scene will surely pull you into this film, making you feel the fear and dread of this muddled story with too many ideas. The Hound of the Baskervilles, 1959. Who would have thought that we would end up with a Sherlock Holmes movie on this list, but here we are. Peter Cushing as Sherlock Holmes, Christopher Lee as Sir Henry Baskerville, and Andre Morel as Dr. Watson. It's truly a treat. Did you guys know that this is actually the first colored film adaptation of the novel? So now you guys can watch Holmes and Watson solve the mystery of the hellhound that torments the Baskervilles in color. We know you've been waiting for that. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's works have been adapted several times over the years, but Hammer Film Productions takes on his work, and it's indeed something out of this world. The Hammer horror formula actually works really well with Doyle's work. If you've read the story several times, we're sure you'll notice the little changes right away. The original story didn't have much for horror elements, but Hammer added a few so that the creepiness and gothic atmosphere felt a little more elevated. Peter Cushing's Holmes and Andre Morel's Watson complement each other extremely well. Also, the real-life friendship between Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee shines through their roles of Sherlock and Henry Baskerville in this movie, making the whole experience that much more enjoyable. While this movie doesn't rank as highly as the Dracula or Frankenstein adaptations, it's still a must-see for any fan of Sherlock Holmes or Hammer films.
The hour grows late.
Twins of Evil, 1971. Peter Cushing, Madeline and Mary Collison, Kathleen Byron, David Warbeck, Damian Thomas, and Isabel Black were all brought together by John Hoff in his 1971 movie Twins of Evil or Twins of Dracula, whichever title you might know it by. This film is the last film in the Karnstein trilogy, which is based on the 1872 novella written by Sheridan Le Fanu titled Carmilla. Out of all three films, this one has the least semblance to the novella. On top of vampires, we also have witch hunting themes in this movie, so the themes of this film are all over the place. The nature of this film is self-evident. Maria and Freda Gellhorn are sisters who move in with their Puritan uncle, who's also the leader of a witch-hunting brotherhood, Gustav Whale. The two sisters don't like their uncle, and Freda starts looking for a way out, but rebelling against their uncle puts their lives in danger as Freda ends up befriending Count Karnstein, who is 100% related to Carmilla. There's no denying that this movie was created as a soft sexual exploitation film with heavy-handed vampire lore dumped on it. The Collison sisters are genuinely two gorgeous women and their acting chops are definitely there, but it's so sad that it gets overshadowed by the goofy sexual exploitation stuff. But if you're to overlook those scenes, this movie is definitely one of the most interesting vampire films that we've ever seen. The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, 1974. Horror films come in several shapes and sizes, but who would have thought that we would end up with a movie that adds martial arts as well as horror to the same film? This 1974 movie, directed by Roy Ward Baker and Chang Che, features 7 different vampires wearing golden masks who were resurrected by John Forbes Robertson's Dracula. These 7 vampires end up wreaking havoc in Hong Kong for decades. However, Van Helsing learns about the village and the vampires when he was at Chungking University for a lecture, and as you can guess, he went after the vampires almost immediately. Now, we know that this movie is at the bottom of our tier list, and probably you're all thinking that this movie isn't very good, but let us tell you, this movie has its charms. Hammer had a bizarre idea, and then they decided that they'd go ahead and do it anyway. This movie brings something fresh to the table. Over the years, we've come across several vampire movies, and how many of them have been Asian in aesthetic? Not a lot. That's why, personally, we really enjoy using the whole Buddha instead of a cross thing to get rid of the vampires in this movie. Now, is this movie the best performance of Peter Cushing? No, definitely not. But will you, as a Peter Cushing fan, enjoy it? Hell yeah! Cushing, as an actor, is extremely enjoyable to watch. No matter what sort of movie he's in, you'll always find yourself enjoying that film. He's a true professional in that regard, and we here at Marvelous Videos would like to salute his work. Marvelous verdict! With that, guys, we're at the end of our video. The Hammer horror films have indeed left a mark on us and the horror genre as a whole. From wacky retellings of vampires to absolutely breathtaking adaptations of well-loved monsters, Hammer has done it all. Hammer Films Productions started out with a small dream, and the spark that started this production house still remains in their recent projects. In case you guys didn't know, the movie The Woman in Black starring Daniel Radcliffe is actually a Hammer Films Productions movie. We're so fascinated to see that the iconic gothic imagery that was a statement piece for Hammer has lived on even to this day. When we saw The Woman in Black, our first thought was, wow, this is such a gothic movie. And the fact that the production house behind that film has such a rich history in horror films truly brings happiness to our souls. Let us know in the comments what you guys think about Hammer Films. Which one's your favorite and why? We look forward to hearing it, and while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.